Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have the launch of my SCASL project. Now, originally I hadn't planned to launch this project as early as I am because I didn't think that the lists got released until the time of their conference, which is the end of March. However, the media specialist at my school released, she sent out an email because she does this PD, if you read some of the YA books, because I teach it to high school, you can earn some extra PD points, professional development points or whatever. And she sent that in February. So immediately I started trying to collect the books. I had immediate thoughts about these lists. As soon as I saw them, I'll talk about those in a second. There were some things that I noticed about these books that made me think and made me want to do a deep dive on the information. When I have more time, will probably go even deeper on the information gathering. All I ended up having time for was looking at some statistics for this current year and last year. I really want to go back and analyze some of these other trends, look for them, see if they are a thing. Because I am incredibly disappointed in this year's list, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I adjusted the angle just a little bit. Now, one of the things about this year, starting it so early means I am not going to be concentrating it all in 1 or 2 months. I'm going to try to chip away at this from now until the end of the summer. And I'm going to talk about them in my weekly recent reads, but I'm also going to have dedicated videos where I go over all of these books. And I have come up with a ranking system that I think is going to work and is going to allow me to input some numbers for certain things and then come up with a ranking system where I don't just look at them and have to decide. Okay, so I'm first going to talk about the ways that I am going to analyze the books this year. Then I'm going to go over all of the 40 books. I have only 37 here because a very large number of them were not available at my local library system, which is one of the bigger library systems in the state. So, interesting. Accessibility, it's a big issue for me. So I'm going to go over all the books, then I'm going to get into some of the statistics. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to rank, I'm not going to rank the books on, I'm just going to say yes or no. Do they have any sort of rep? And I'm going to talk about what rep they have, but that's not going to be part of how I evaluate it, really. When I mention the rep, I'm going to mention what sort of rep it is. Is it some sort of racial or ethnic rep? Is it some sort of ability rep? And is it some sort of LGBTQ plus rep? So I'm going to talk about that. Now, what I'm going to rank it on, I found a website that gave several different categories for how teens themselves would rank these different books. And these are the categories. This was teens top 10 criteria. I'm going to use 5 of these, and I'm also going to rank them out of 5. And then I'm going to total them all up, average them to give them a score. So I have them written down here. I'm going to rank them on appeal, which includes cover, because people say don't judge a book by its cover. We judge a book by its cover. Literary quality, its uniqueness, the characters, their reliability, and their distinctions. Plot, is the plot engaging? Is it kind of ho-hum, etc.? The content and the style, what sort of things is it talking about, and what is the style in which it is written? Is that going to be appealing? And then also my personal enjoyment. So my personal enjoyment is the only time when me as a reader is going to come into this as opposed to these other rankings. And it's only one of 5 things, so it's not going to overly influence the ranking. So that's how I'm going to rank them. As I go through each of these books, I'm not going to give a detailed synopsis because I haven't read these books, with the exception of 1. Literally there was about 5 combined on the list last year that I had read. This year, 1, which I've been reading more recent young adult and middle grade books, especially with my Goodreads projects, so that really surprises me. Several of them I've heard about, but I've read only one of them. So I'm going to talk about them just briefly as I go over them, as I show them, and then I'm going to mention the 3 of the YA books that I did not manage to get a hold of a copy of. I went ahead and decided to do this deep dive instead of putting in more interlibrary loan requests for those 3. All right, we're going to start with middle grade. And first off, we have an adventure sort of novel with Wild River by Rodman Philbrick. He's a very common, prolific middle grade author. I think I've read from him before. Survival stories, there's usually at least one of them. Then we have a repeat author for me, but not because of SCASL, because another one of her books was on the Goodreads Choice Awards list last year, and that is Lindsay Curry. So we have What Lives in the Wood, and this is middle grade horror, which is not my genre, but the previous book that I read of hers was not all that spooky and horrific, so I think I'll be okay. Then we have 2 sci-fi books. We have Stowaway, where this kid and a friend get stuck on a ship, and hence they are stowaways. And then we have The Lion of Mars. I've read the synopsis. I have no idea. I don't remember what this is about. Then we have the one and only nonfiction on either of these lists, and that is Fallout, Spies, Super Bombs, and the Ultimate Cold War Showdown. We then have 2 historical fiction. We have Lines of Courage, which is a World War I historical fiction. I believe this is multi-POV. And then we have Cuba in My Pocket by Adriana Cuevas, which is, I believe, around the time of the 50s or 60s, the time of the Cuban Revolution. All of the rest of the books, 13 of the books, are what I consider contemporary, or that type of setting where it's timeless, where it can be any sort of contemporary thing. And that's one of the things that I noticed with the data, is that most of this tends to be contemporary. And I'm like, you know, sometimes kids like things that aren't in our real world. But anyway, we have Worst Case Colin by Rebecca Caprara, Maisie's Last Chance by Lisa Yee. I actually have an arc of this. Obviously, I'm behind on my arcs, but that's kind of one of the only ones that I'm excited about. We have a typical sports-focused one with Rivals by Tommy Greenwald. These are never my favorites, but I think they try to pick ones that appeal to both females and males. We have Linked by Gordon Corman. This is a repeat author on the SCASL list. I don't know how many times, because I wasn't able to go that far back in my data gathering. We have Flight of the Puffin by Anne Braden. I have read one other of hers, and I believe it was for the SCASL list. It had something to do with octopuses, octopi, whatever the plural of that is, but I forget the title of it. Then we have Now You Say Yes. Next, Eddie Whatever by Lois Ruby. I realize I'm not always remembering to say the author's name, but I'm going to try to do that from now on. We have Ahmed Aziz's Epic Year by Nina Hamza. Fast Pitch by Nick Stone. Playing the Cards You're Dealt by Varian Johnson. I have read another one of Varian Johnson's books, which was co-authored by an illustrator. It was a nominee on the middle grades Goodreads list, and it was a graphic novel. Next, we have 365 Days to Alaska by Kathy Carr. We have yet another survival story with Across the Desert by Dusty Bowling. This is yet another repeat author on this list. And the 20th book is An Occasionally Happy Family by Cliff Burke. Okay, so there you have the middle grades list. Now we come to the young adult list. And I'm going to talk about the book that first jumped off the page at me and made me question just about everything, like this nominating process and all of that, because I don't know who in their right mind would put this on a young adult book list. Like, there's no question about this. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is not a young adult book. There are so many amazing sci-fi young adult books, and yet they choose Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is not a young adult book. I really want to know what goes into the selection process, because there's flaws. There's lots of flaws, and I think that deep dive is going to reveal them. But again, does any book award nominating list system Is any of it perfect? I don't know. But this is a glaring error. Never thought I would read an anti-war book. But I'm going to, because I'm going to complete this project. From what I've heard in reviews, there are some things in here that are definitely not YA. I have no idea why this is picked to be a YA book nominee. I really want to know. On that note, I'm going to show another book where I have probably negative interest in reading this book. And I went and I was looking at reviews on Goodreads, and I found a review from someone who apparently participated in the nominating process for SCASL, because she mentioned that in her review. She mentioned she's a librarian and she's participating in this group, and it struck me as odd because she rated the book 2 stars and yet said that there wasn't really all that much like this that had been nominated, so she went ahead and suggested it. I don't know what's going on in your head to, as a librarian, rate a book so low and yet still recommend it. It baffles me. I did comment on her review asking if I could maybe get in touch with her because I'm doing this deep dive and I would love to find out more information. I've never heard back from her. Honestly, that's not all that surprising because maybe she's not active on Goodreads, or maybe she doesn't have notifications set up for replies to her comments. So she probably never saw that because it was a while ago that she read it, relatively speaking. This is the book. Enduring Freedom, co-authored by Jawad Arash and Trent Reedy. This is a fictionalized story of these 2 men, one of which is clearly an American soldier, the other of which is an Afghan native, who I'm assuming serves as a translator. I don't know whether or not I want to get into what could become controversial, but the kind of idolatry almost that our country has for the military. This all seems like it's going to be painted in a really positive light, putting a positive spin on the fact that we completely upended people's lives for 2 decades and then left, and they're almost worse off than they were before. Why are we offering this? Why are we offering this to our young adult lists? I don't have as much to say about the rest of these lists, so I'm just going to go through these. I categorize that as historical fiction, even though it's contemporary-ish, but it's from maybe 2 decades ago. So I'm counting that as historical fiction. All right, so the others are also historical fiction. We have African Town by Irene Latham and Charles Waters. I believe this is also, it is also in verse, and it is about the Middle Passage, basically. The next is another repeat author from this list, but I really enjoyed the book I read from her previously, which was Hidden Places. It was a really interesting take on an aspect of World War II history, and I believe this does the same. This is Bluebird by Sharon Cameron. It's always an interesting design choice when the author's name is bigger than the title, but I get that the author has no control over that. Next, I'm going to go into the fantasy side, and I believe I've put some magical realism type books in here as well, witchy type. Basically, if they had any sort of non-natural element, I put them in this pile. And we also start with the one book off both lists that I've read before, and that is Beasts of Prey. I mean, it's a good choice to have on here. I'm going to go through, when I start ranking, this will be in the first batch because I've read it already, and I'm going to rank it on the categories that I already listed. Next, we have the only other book amongst this that I own, and it was already on my radar. I really wanted to read it. It was a nominee in one of the Goodreads categories, but I don't remember which one that is, and that is Who the F Are You by Huda Fanmi. Really excited that this one is on here. One of the few that I'm excited is on here. I don't know why I switched categories, but that's contemporary. Back to the fantasy. We have The City Beautiful by Aidan Polydoros. I'm also kind of nervous about this one because some of the fantasy described in here is not my typical fantasy ideal fantasy that I enjoy, but I'll give it a try. Next, we have All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. Again, I've heard a lot about this on BookTube and it never really caught my eye or my attention, and I wouldn't have read it except for this. Then we have one that is more magical realism, and this one was also already on my TBR, and that is The Cost of Knowing by Brittany Morris. And what makes this magical realism is one of the characters, when they touch a person, they're able to see how that person dies. And so that's the bit of magical realism, and he finds out something tragic about what's going to happen, I think, to his brother. Next, we have A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is the witchy type. I don't know how paranormal it is. I don't know how much fantasy it is, but I have heard about this before on BookTube. Another one that I have heard of, but mixed reviews, is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Barron. This is more straightforward fantasy. I am now going to mention the 3 books that I do not have, and I will pop up a picture here. The first of those is actually historical fiction. That is The Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. Next, I have She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan. I am not a rom-com kind of person, and there are several of these type on this list. I have heard of this one briefly when it was coming out. And the last of the 3 that I do not have is Vinyl Moon by Mahogany L. Brown. Never heard of this before, but I am intrigued. The last of these books, I have them stacked here. They're all technically contemporary, but some of them are more thriller type, like secrets idea, but I'm going to start with the ones that are more contemporary. This is the one probably would rank 3rd in how much I do not want to get to it, but that is The Quantum Weirdness of the Almost Kiss by Amy Noel Parks. This is actually a significantly older work. Most of these books are 2021, but this one is from 2020. So it's weird that they reached back to grab this one when there are so many other amazing YA books out. Then we have You'd Be Home Now by Kathleen Gaskell. This is one of 2 books on this list that have the opioid epidemic somewhat at the center of it. Well, this one it definitely is, but the other one is sort of at the center. Then we have In the Wild Light by Jeff Zentner. I believe this is the other one that has the opioid epidemic at least mentioned in it. We have Every Single Lie by Rachel Vincent. And this one, she is, I guess, under suspicion because the body of a dead baby is found in her bag or in her possession. Then we have one, so the ones for Interlibrary Loan, I took the sticker off that they put on it and put on the back so that you'd be able to see the cover. There was another Interlibrary Loan sticker underneath it and I couldn't get that one off. So why did I even bother? I don't know. The thing about Interlibrary Loan is it costs $1 to get it. So paid $1 to show you this covered up book. Anyway, this is The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp. I have heard about this one. I didn't realize that it was YA. This is one that I wouldn't have picked up if it had not been on this list. And the last of these total 40 books that I have is Lies Like Wildfire by Jennifer Lynn Alvarez. Again, this is in the bottom tier of the ones that I want to read because there seems to be almost every single time on these lists a book that is sort of like some sort of mysterious crime, murder mystery type thing set up like The Breakfast Club with all of those mix of people in there, like the Karen M. McManus, the only Karen M. McManus one that I've read, the really terrible one last year that I have completely tried to wipe from my memory. So those are all of the books, a rather interesting mix. Now I'm going to go over some of the statistics, but I'm going to do it just briefly. I have it all. So I went through and I copied down some things on these papers. I looked primarily at genre, whether there was any rep, and gender of the author. So by and large, middle grade and YA are written by women. I think that's fairly obvious. So that one, that one will probably not be a statistic that I keep tracking. I thought, and it is true, but only by a little bit. There are more contemporary books this year than last year, but overwhelmingly both years It's heavily weighted on the contemporary. Now, for the purpose of this video, I did sometimes lump in some of the books like Lies Like Wildfire under contemporary because I wasn't sure about a subgenre. So I guess if you're looking at genres themselves, you might think, okay, maybe that's a different genre. It is what it is. Then when I look at the genres for middle grade, there are no fantasy in this middle grade list. And I know for a fact that there were plenty of fantasy middle grades that came out last year. I mean, just look at the Rick Riordan imprint, or Zachary Ying and the Dragon Emperor, or Witchlings. Like, I don't know why there's no fantasy on the middle grade list. Obviously, I'm biased towards fantasy, but that seems like a glaring omission there. There are 2 sci-fi, there are 2 historical, and then the 1 nonfiction. And the rest were contemporary. And these, the middle grades, they are very contemporary. There is the 1 horror. And I did take out the adventure one when I was stacking them. So technically there's like 14 that are contemporary. 14 out of 20. Why are we so stuck in this one type of book? I don't know. Then when it comes to rep, especially in the middle grade, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to pull out the ones that I believe have some sort of rep. One thing that struck me here, look at the color of the hands. Some of them I'm not 100% sure because I haven't read it, so it may be some neurodivergent rep or something that I am missing when I'm just looking at the cover or the synopsis. So for middle grade lists, these are the ones with rep. 6 of them have some sort of rep that I can see. One other one might be this one. I believe that the sister of the main character is neurodivergent, but I don't know for sure. So if we're generous, 7 of these books have some sort of rep. Like, that's it. There's no real Latinx books on here. There is this historical fiction about Cuba, but there are a lot of Cubans not represented by what most people think of as Cuban. This is a very European looking Cuban person on here. There are 2 that are African American. There is Fast Pitch by Nick Stone and Playing the Cards You're Dealt by Varian Johnson. There is Asian, I believe Chinese, with Maisie Chen's Last Chance. And I have on here that there were 2 that had Jewish rep, very specifically, prominently mentioned, but I don't remember what the other one is. So the only one that I can find is Linked by Gordon Corman. That's not a good showing. Now, it does get a little bit better when it comes to the YA books. So now I'm going to sort those out. Okay, the YA, it does get a little bit better. Now, you'll notice in the middle grade, there's no LGBT rep. In YA, there are 3 that I know for sure have LGBT rep. This is main character from what I know about the synopsis. This is also main character. I'm not sure if this one is main character or just side characters. Now, racial rep, technically, you could say this one, but I don't know how it's doing the rep. I'm hesitant on that one, just like I was with Wild Bird last year. It was terrible Native American rep. I don't know the quality of the rep in any of these. This is just on the surface. So for the other, there are 5, literally 5. There is no Latinx rep whatsoever in this list. And South Carolina has one of the fastest growing Latinx populations in the country. There's no Latinx rep in any of these selections. So the rep that is present in these books, we have African Town, we have Beasts of Prey, Who to F Are You? This is obviously Own Voices as well because it's a memoir. The Cost of Knowing, This Poison Heart, and also I forgot the one that I don't have, Vinyl Moon. That is also African American rep. That's it. Oh, She Drives Me Crazy is also LGBT rep. So all told, that's 10. That's half, but the fact that you're missing an entire ethnicity, an ethnicity that is a significant part of the target demographics, like how can I recommend any of these books to kids at my old school, the Title I school that I used to teach at? none of these books would appeal to them, as far as I know. Like, some of them, yes, they'd be interested in, but most of these, they would look at them and they would go, I'm not really interested in that. I don't really connect with that. And I don't know what to say about that. The rep is less. Last year, for middle grade, there were 8 books that had some sort of racial rep, whether it was African American or Latinx or Asian. 6 of the books had some sort of ability rep, whether that was neurodivergence or something physical instead of mental. Some of those, there are overlaps, because I think there was at least 1 book that had both in it. Middle grade this year, there are 6 books with rep, which is 2 less than last year, but 2 of those 6 are center the Jewish identity, which, yes, doesn't need to be talked about, but it's not, I put it in that category because it didn't fit with either ability or sexuality. YA books, last year, 10 of the books had rep. This year, 7. Racial rep, racial and ethnicity. That's a decrease. Ability-wise, there were 3 of the books that had rep, whereas 1 this year. That may change as I get into it, because the ability rep is not always mentioned in the synopses, but usually they do try to push that. And then sexuality rep, there were 7 in last year's list and 5 in this year's list. So it's not a huge shift. It seems very obvious to me. I did put a count at the top of my chart of ones that did not have any discernible rep. And last year, both middle grade and YA, there were 4 books with no discernible rep. This year, middle grade, there are 12 books with no discernible rep. 12. That's math. 3/5. 3/5 of the book with no discernible rep, at least prior to reading it. And that's a 3 times increase. And for YA, there are 8 with no discernible rep. That's a 2-fold increase. Am I surprised that these categories of rep have gone down? Unfortunately, no. In the particular political environment in which I live, a very conservative state, very red state, a state where parents feel empowered, certain parents feel empowered to challenge a lot. I find it very interesting that the books that have been chosen for these lists feel safe. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I hope that I will be able to discover more rep in these books as I read them, rep that is not mentioned or obvious. I really think that for it to be centered and get out to the target audience, it needs to be more obvious. And the fact that it's not, I think, really is driven by a desire to pick things that are more safe. There were some pretty controversial ones that I read last year, and they were some of my favorite. Like, I cannot see This Is My America being nominated this year. I think it would automatically get challenged, and parents would be upset that the school librarians or the public librarians are promoting this to their kids, even though the kids are the ones that read the book and choose whether or not they like it. That's this type of award. I have a lot of complicated feelings about this, and it's kind of a sour note to end it on. I really want to go more in depth with this series and perhaps share a little bit of what I've discovered in each of the installments, or at a halfway check-in and a final check-in, because I really do want to dig deeper into this, and I want to see if there's someone that I can reach out to find out more about the process and how these books get nominated. Because even though I don't teach language arts, I'm not a librarian, I am really invested in the kinds of books that are promoted and pushed out and made available to my students, to the students of my state. It is going to be an interesting project this year, and one that I am invested in and I want to do right. But I have to get these books back to the library because I've had them out for a few weeks, especially my interlibrary loan ones. I hope you will join me for this journey as I make it through these 39 books, only 39 because I've read one of them, this year for my SCASL project. Bigger and better things this year, I hope. as far as my evaluation of them. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.